Hey, well, good evening, everybody. This is Patrick from the Poison Pen Bookstore in Scottsdale, Arizona. Sorry, I've lost my voice. We are delighted to have Candace Robb with us this evening, talking about our brand new Owen Archer book, Snake in the Barley. And we just have a handful of signed copies left. But I'll go ahead and put a link if you'd like to purchase one. And I also brought Severn House has done such a wonderful job of reprinting the entire series. And I thought I'd pick up the first one here, The Apothecary Rose. And I can go through and show you the covers if you'd like, but this is an impressive, this is the entire oeuvre.
Right, it's
This must
14.
feel like this is your life, Candace.
Right.
It is. It really does.
It actually is probably. It's 14 books because this one, A Snake in the Barley, is the 15th for Owen Archer. But Candace has written other books as well, but we're focusing on Owen Archer tonight. So I think it's great that her publisher is supporting the whole series. If you've never read them, you can read each one of them as a standalone, and that's fine. Especially this one because there's not a lot, there's some past history in it, but it's not dependent on it. But if you haven't read them, I would start with The Apothecary Rose and move forward. Wouldn't you, Candace?
Oh, I would. Yeah. I, I
Absolutely.
think I think what happens, well, for me in any series I'm reading, if the author really has developed the characters, it's lovely to start at the beginning and see how they develop.
That's
And
right.
so,
Yeah, and their relationships as well. Those
yeah,
parts can be spoiled if you come in later. If
yeah,
somebody's gotten married, if somebody's died, if somebody, whatever, you lose that little bit of suspense. You don't lose the mystery and the resolution if you come in later, but you do lose that. So, Candace, this is so close to Christmas. I went and got my little cup from let's see, this is the Rudesheimer Christmas market, my little cup, which was full of glühwein when I bought it, and I've
oh,
just
that's
filled it
cute.
up with glühwein. And
Oh,
I'm going to sit here and drink it because even though Patrick says it's unseasonably warm in Phoenix, it's actually by now kind of chilly.
your evenings get cold.
60 as compared to, I know. It's so funny. You can always tell the locals because all the tourists are here, in their shorts and flip-flops, and all the locals are wrapped up in sweaters and boots. It's so funny. You do get used to it, to the heat, and then you are cold when it's like 55 or 60.
That's fascinating.
Mm.
Oh,
So people in York would just laugh. They think we were in a heat wave. But,
oh, they would. They would. They
so
would in Seattle too.
I know. Anyway, when we started with the Apothecary Rose, we are in the 14th century. We are in York, which is a city in the north of England, far enough from London to have its own kind of between the church and the local officials be kind of independent. But at the same time, events in London are going to play into life in York. And in this book, we are seeing the very edges of the War of the Roses because John of Gaunt, the uncle of the young heir to the throne left behind when his father, the Black Prince, died. John of Gaunt, living in London at the Savoy Palace, to his credit, never actually usurped the throne, didn't kill his nephew, didn't usurp the throne, but his son began the War of the Roses, right? But are you going to write your way up to that? Because this is 1377. I'm trying to remember when was Richard killed? Was it 1390?
1399. So
Right.
I
Okay.
dealt with that in the Kate Clifford books
Right.
because I knew that I probably would never get quite up to there with the Owen Archers.
Well, Owen and Lucy would be pretty old by those standards. If you made it
Yeah.
22 more years, 23 more years, that would be no, 22 more years. Be a little
Yeah.
difficult. But anyway, for those of you who have never read Catherine by Anya Seton, which is sort of I think, essential book to understand the War of the Roses, you might want to read it because it does explain to you how the life of John of Gaunt, his marital adventures and his various children, some of whom were legitimized, eventually led to the Tudors and the resolution of the war, the Red and the White Roses.
There's,
Um,
there's another book that's out right now, Helen Castor's The Eagle and the Heart.
Oh,
about it's nonfiction, but it
okay.
reads like fiction, and it's about Richard II and Henry IV.
Uh,
And it takes you through Richard's birth and the family tensions and the tensions between the two of them and John of Gaunt's attempts to calm everything down after King Edward dies. And I think she's doing I'm not quite finished with it, but she's doing a fabulous job of it. And it's giving me nightmares. So, because when you have France about to attack the UK, they have this huge army massing in the lowlands and in the Low Countries, and Richard is just gallivanting around the country with his cronies, having a wonderful time and saying, "Oh, the French aren't going to harm me." And it's a nightmarish scenario. Really shows you why that all began.
well, it's really never, hardly ever goes well when a very young child is left heir to the throne. There are so many people. I was saying to a friend of mine while we were walking the other day that Louis XIV was one of the few examples of a child that was, I mean, left as a baby and managed to grow up and reign forever. And then his
Yeah.
grandson, is it grandson or great grandson, Louis XV, the same thing. He managed to survive being a child and eventually take the throne. But in general, youngsters, they got killed, they died, whatever it might be. And, I think John of Gaunt, you would not, you might have expected him to get rid of Richard, but he didn't.
No. And I think it's clear in this book, in A Snake in the Barley, that he is trying to keep the peace in England. And yet it's a very fraught time because people don't know what is going to happen and who is going to rule. And John of Gaunt does have a really nasty temper with the Londoners, which gets him in a lot of trouble.
He
And
does.
that's kind of the background event for some of the characters who wind up coming to York in this book.
Well, it's also true that York is one of the major Catholic prelate cities, and has a cathedral and has an archbishop. And so the Catholic Church has a lot to say about what happens in York. And Owen, in fact, worked for one of the bishops, right? The archbishop.
Right, the Archbishop Thoresby, but he died in 1374.
Right.
So the Archbishop now is one of the Nevilles. The Nevilles have put him, you know, campaigned very hard for one of their own to become the Archbishop, and he's never there. I mean, he could care less about York. He so he's sort of disappeared from the story for the most part, but I have things to do with him in coming books.
Well, I know that Thoresby was, he was very present in some of the
Oh, yeah.
earlier Owen Archer books. So tell us a little bit about Owen for people who don't know his story. He's not from York.
No, he's from Wales. He was captain of archers for John of Gaunt's father-in-law, Henry Gromont. He was the first Duke of Lancaster. And when he is blinded in one eye, in the left eye, which is the worst for a right-handed archer to be blinded in the kind of that's the background of the first book. He has to find another way to live, and he becomes sort of a spy for the Duke of Lancaster.
Right.
And the Duke of Lancaster, when he dies, he passes him on to Archbishop Thoresby. So that's how Owen winds up in York. Not very happy about winding up there. And he thinks the city is dark and smelly and cold.
It is cold. Yeah, I mean,
And then he
definitely.
meets Lucy.
Right. So Lucy, I'm trying to remember, Lucy's a widow, right? When he meets,
No, not at the
no?
beginning of the book. No, No, she is the wife of the apothecary Nicholas Wilton.
Oh, okay. All right.
And Owen is placed in the apothecary to find out how somebody, he was a nephew of Archbishop Thoresby, how he was killed, because he doesn't believe that he just died accidentally in the Abbey infirmary. So
Okay.
that's how the whole series starts.
Right. But eventually Lucy and Owen get married. So
Right.
Lucy does at some point become a widow, since divorce was an incredibly expensive and very infrequent event back in those days.
That's true.
Right. So here we are. Lots going on. I like the way their lives keep evolving. I mean, England's evolving, and Lucy and Owen, they get new neighbors, they're different children, there's all kinds of stuff that happens. So, I mean, in a sense, it's kind of a saga, isn't it, with investigations in every book?
It is, and what I'm enjoying is like in this book, Bess and Tom Merchant, the owners of the York Tavern right next door to Owen and Lucy's home and the apothecary, have been in the story from the very beginning. In fact, Bess was in the story when it was just a short story that I was trying to market before I decided to turn it into a book. And I've never really talked about, you can hear my cat every once in a while. The Maggie wants to go back out and we don't let her out once it's dark. So she's irritated. But anyway, the York Tavern is a part of the story from the very beginning. But I'd never really told much of a story about Tom Merchant. I didn't give much of his background. We know a little about Bess, and Bess sort of had her moment in the spotlight in The Riddle of St. Leonard's, the fifth book.
Mm.
But Tom really has just been this quiet character who's always there polishing the tankards, and he's the Brewster, which is unusual in the Middle Ages. It's usually the women. And yeah, so I just decided to give his story, his background, which I checked all the old books, and I realized I really hadn't filled that in, so I could just have him have an interesting background, something that he kept from Bess because he didn't want to lose her. She's the best thing that's happened in his life. And so this book really is a love story of Bess and Tom Merchant. It's a middle-aged love story. And I really enjoyed telling it. Of course, I have to give them a lot of trouble. So it's not a sweet love story.
No, and actually, it's a good thing they've been married for quite a while when this all happens, because it might never have come to pass otherwise. But anyway, Tom goes missing, and he's been missing for quite a while, and rumors are swirling about, what has happened to Tom. Is he dead? Is he alive? Where is he gone? And Bess, of course, is really frantic over the whole thing because she doesn't know.
Yeah, and what I like about Bess, and she's been this way from the very beginning, is she's not going to sit still and just let Owen take over and investigate. She's going to investigate too. So she has one of the things that's kind of sweet about the cover of this book is that there's this scene in which Bess is cloaked and she goes to investigate something that she suspects, a place where she suspects Tom may have been, not that he's there now, and she finds a body. And it's this kind of misty, cold morning when she's going there. And my editor just loved this scene. So when she was talking to the artist about what was going to be on the cover, she wanted, the cloaked woman in the kind of stormy, mysterious street to be on the cover. And so she's very happy with the cover of this book.
I think it's very nice too. And I wanted to point out, you can really see that they have in the O in Candace's name incorporated some arrows, the sort of kind of add to the whole thing. You have very interesting titles. I've always enjoyed them. And, A Fox in the Fold, A Conspiracy of Wolves, Spy for the Redeemer and all. Do you come up with the titles yourself, and are they integral to how the story progresses, or how does the titling of the books work for you?
I come up with them, and sometimes I have to go through a few before my agent really says, "Okay, that one sounds good." But not often. And the odd thing is that more and more as the series has gone on, the title comes almost at the same point as my thinking about the plot and putting it together. So A Snake in the Barley was something when I decided I wanted Tom and Bess to be the center of the story. And Tom is a brewer, and barley is what they brew the ale with from. I just decided barley needed to be in the title. Something about an ale or a brewster needed to be in the title. And I went through a zillion ideas before I just, I was thinking a snake in the grass, the spy, the troublemaker. And I thought a snake in the barley. And and I tried it out on a couple friends who I usually try it out on first, and my agent, and they all liked it. So I sent it to Severn House, and I said, "Well, I have the title. I haven't started writing yet, but I have the title." And they loved it. Yeah, so I come up with them myself.
So, A Fox in the Fold, that was the book before. What was that?
Well, I wanted to evoke the idea that there was someone in the city of York, in Owen's care, in this place that he feels he's the shepherd with his fold. He's taking care of the city of York. He's the captain of York now. And I wanted to say, now a fox has gotten in there
Okay.
and no one has to find him. And I was also playing with, at the time, until they came up with this stylized arrow to put the O, we were putting little animals in the O's. There was a crow, and then there was a dragon for the river woman's dragon, and then there was a fox for a fox in the fold. So I was coming up with animal names to put. So actually, yeah, I had expected a snake to be in this O because I started working on this book before they came up with the stylized, you know, symbol that's now going to be in all the books.
Well, I think, a vigil of spies would have been harder to, evoke an animal. Not every, with the Lady Chapel, not everyone, the titles would lend itself to little animals in there. But
Right.
I do think that the titles are evocative of the books. And,
Thank you.
Candace, I was thinking today when I was putting together a mailing list for the invitation that we sent out, at one point there were so many people writing medieval mystery. And, now it's shrunk dramatically. I mean, it's you. And Paul Doherty is still writing. He's been writing for like 40 years. He's still writing them under now Paul as opposed to PC Doherty, I think. But anyway, but Alice Clare moved on to something else. Priscilla Royal is, I think, maybe independently publishing. She was my author at Poison Pen Press, and I really loved her books. Edith, Ellis Peters is gone. Michael Jex, I think, has moved on to something else. There was a really interesting guy that wrote a series about Oxford, and I think the Jewish community was involved, and I couldn't remember his name today. Do you recall who I'm talking about?
No, I don't. I mean,
British
Shelley
author.
Whitman talked a lot about the Jewish community in France in her books.
Yeah. Well, anyway, there was a lot, and now
Mhm.
they're just a very even Jerry Westerson has moved on, I think, to a different era than her Christman guest books, which were again earlier on. And I wonder, historical mystery has become there's not as many different countries and things represented. It's all World War II at the moment. But, for a long time, you could find like 3 or 4 series set in Egypt and, medieval mysteries. There were some 18th century and all, but it seems to have sort of fallen slightly out of fashion. And I'm not sure why.
I'm not sure either, but I'm a medievalist by education, by training, and so that's what I do. That's what I write. Uh,
Right.
I'm working on something else that's not quite a mystery, but that too is set in the Middle Ages because that's just where I live.
I didn't name Sharon Newman too, who wrote, as you say, they were set in France, and hers were much more concerned with the Catholics and the Cathars and, very dissenting groups in the Catholic clergy in France. But anyway, I personally love historical mystery. I think there's lots to learn, and at some point we will have explored every aspect of World War II that we can, and then maybe we'll move back. But also, publishing tends to follow success, and so The Name of the Rose and A Morbid Taste for Bones, which came out at the very end of the 80s, I think it was, really kind of, created a demand for medieval mystery. And so there usually is kind of a path breaker, when something becomes really successful, and then it kind of burns itself out. I mean, after the Da Vinci Code, there were Da Vinci clones for
Oh, yeah. Goodness. They were all over the place. Yeah.
at least 3 years worth of religious conspiracy thrillers. That was basically all you could get. So I keep waiting to see what's going to happen, for the breakthrough book that will somehow turn us back into some historical era. But meantime, it's so great that you are steadfastly staying in 14th century York.
I am. It's my period.
It is your period. And that means that the reader can really trust what you're saying. I mean, you are so steeped in the period and you're such a good researcher that we can trust what it is. What's that? Patrick has remembered. It is Ian Morson. Thank you very much. Ian Morson was the
Ian
author.
Morson. Yeah.
Yeah, they were so good. I really love those books. So, and
do you remember Leonard Turney? I mean, that's a long time ago, and I loved his books.
Me too. But the great thing about historical mystery is that it doesn't age out. So
No,
at some point, it's always possible to bring them back, and a whole new generation can find them. I was dismayed to see that only A Morbid Taste for Bones and the sequel are currently available, because I would have thought that the entire Ellis Peters oeuvre would still be, because it's 20 books, would be available in this country, but no.
yeah. Yeah, when it's quite a while now. It's maybe 15 years ago. I headed a panel at the big International Congress on Medieval Studies in Kalamazoo on Ellis Peters and the writing of the CAD files. And I had a historian from Wales. He came over to talk about her excellent history. And let's see if I can pick her up and let you see the Maggie. This is my beautiful.
Oh, there she is. Your cross kitty.
Yes.
Right.
Very cross. She wants to go out. She wants to be in the dark. But anyway, then I had another person who was a literary critic talk about her style, and it was a wonderful session, and all the books were available there at the time at the conference so that people could buy them all. So I'm really, really surprised that there's only a few of them available right now.
Well, I think the digital books are available. Headline in the UK, which was her publisher. I mean, Edith was a very good friend. I used to spend time with her. We used to write back and forth. I visited her in Shrewsbury several times. In fact, her last book, she was in the nursing home having had her leg amputated because of her circulation was compromised. And anyway, and I stopped in London at Orion, and they gave me copies of Brother Cadville's Penance, which is the last one. And I took them out to Shrewsbury, and I remember when we sat down, and I pulled out all these books for her to sign, and all hadn't really said much about who she was at the nursing home, and then it turned her into sort of a celebrity. And she said to me, "Only you, Barbara," she said, "will come to see me and bring books," So she was wonderful. She died too soon.
Yes.
Because she had always intended to take that series up to the advent of Henry II and Eleanor to get through that
Oh,
whole war between Stephen and Matilda. And
wow.
she didn't quite make it, but that was her goal, was to write, probably would have been 25, to have fully embraced that earlier version of the War of the Roses, the one between Stephen and Matilda that ended with Henry II and the start of the Plantagenet dynasty in England.
Let's hope that I get through the Peasants' Revolt because that's what I've been working toward all these years.
Oh, there we go. All right, so let's go back to Tom Merchant. And it turns out that Tom was seen visiting a woman, the widow Cobb, and everybody wonders what Tom was up to with the widow Cobb. So
Yes.
that adds to Bess's distress, I think, that
Oh, it definitely does because she's wondering who this woman was. She is an older woman now, but she can tell that she was once pretty attractive, and she has all these men coming up to her rooms, and so that's where she's headed when she stumbles on a body, and that's a kind of early in the story, and she knows now that something is very wrong, that Tom is really into something.
Yep.
And I like that little moment when you know that this isn't just, that Tom got drunk and was away and maybe with friends, but there's something really dangerous that he's involved in.
That's right. Well, I mean, it wasn't an era where you could text home and say, I stopped off for, a week with friends, or, I'm drunk in the pub down here and wherever it might be. You can't do that. So communication is slow, and
Yeah,
that adds to the whole thing, doesn't it?
yeah, yep. Because like in the midst of the story, I have to send Owen to Beverly, and it's a 2-day trip, at least. And in a modern story, I could just have him there, within hours and home again that night. But this develops into a trip with, you know, people on their tail and danger on their tail and trying to figure out what's going on in Beverly. And I liked getting him out of the city for a while because I've had him pretty much in the city in all the 4 previous books.
That's right. And Beverly is over east on the coast. I've been there, and it has a little, if not Minster Abbey, whatever it is of its own, that has some pretty nifty medieval stuff.
It is a minster,
Yeah,
and
I
it's
thought
it's
so.
gorgeous. It
Yeah,
has all those wonderful, wonderful musicians, carvings of the
that's
musicians.
it. Yep, I remember in
Yeah.
particular that the sort of, gargoyle or statuary, whatever you want to call it, in Beverly is very well thought of. One of the things that I've always liked about the production of the books is that there are useful maps. And
Husband's maps.
yep, I really like them. So it's York in the 14th century, a larger picture, and then a smaller one that relates to the area around the story. Now, I have stayed at the Booth and Bar. There's actually, I don't know if it's still there, but the first time I went to York, there was I don't know if I'd call it a bed and breakfast or an inn. I can't remember what, but anyway, it was actually in the Booth and Bar gate. And
Yeah.
it was recommended that you stay in the top floor. And I didn't realize, of course, that this being a very old place, if you had luggage, you had to drag it upstairs, to get up there. But the idea being that if you lay in bed on the top floor of the Booth and Bar gate, and in the morning you would hear the minster bells and so forth, and you would think that you were back in like the 14th century because nothing had changed. So, York has city walls. At least last time I was there, you could still walk the walls, at least those that are still standing. It has wonderful little narrow lanes. What are they called? No, Scotland.
Snickleways.
They're called what?
Snickleways.
Okay, thank you. I was getting them confused with Edinburgh, where they're called winds or wines or whatever.
Mhm.
Okay. And it has bridges over the Ouse. So, and there were various gates. There was Micklegate and the Bootham Gate, and I can't remember, Minster Gate. There were a whole bunch. And, so it was a walled city when Owen is here. And that meant that the citizens could close the gates and keep the inhabitants in. But you also, if you were outside, you couldn't come back in if you were there after curfew without a good reason.
That's right. That's right. There are guards at all the gates, and that's always I have to consider that when I have people coming in and out, and how they're going to get back in, and the fact that if somebody committed a crime in the city during the night, it's pretty likely that either one of the captains of the gates saw them leaving first thing in the morning, or they're still there.
Mhm.
And so it's just a little extra thing, in the night watchman that you have to work in when you're working on something. But I think it's a lot easier than trying to deal with cell phones.
That's very true. But, there was a lot of surveillance that was possible in a walled city with gates and guards and, relatively small population. We think that we are often under surveillance today. But the truth is that as Owen is investigating this, it's surprising how many people, have kept an eye on this or that. And so you get a lot of eyewitness testimony.
Well, it's a small town, and I've always liked the city as a character and the people of the city as characters, just a conglomeration of characters. And so it's fun to have all these people, saying, well, I saw Tom here, and oh, well, I wasn't thinking of it, but then the wife said this, and I thought, no, I did see him the other day, and it's I really enjoy, it's probably obvious. I enjoy creating characters and just thinking about these ordinary people and how this is their little moment of fame. This is the moment when they can go to the captain and say, I think I can help you.
No, I think it's wonderful. And I thought about that when I was reading just now or this afternoon in the New York Times about how they've tracked down the person they think, killed the United Health executive. And, they found like a candy, a health bar wrapper and a bottle of water. And then they figured out that he, track his backpack, that he'd left it in Central Park. And then they figured out he took a bus and, on and on. And eventually they have, found him, or the person they think is
Well, they think they
responsible.
have found him.
Well, exactly. But what's interesting is the way they have been able to track him in a huge, an enormous and anonymous city where he could ride in by bus and nobody's like checking the bus terminals and all. But now that we put in so many surveillance cameras and, we have, DNA evidence, all kinds of things, or it almost felt like Owen, trying to track John Merchant, that the NYPD trying to track this guy reminded me in many ways of the case. The tracking that you've done in this book.
Yeah, I guess really detective work is the same down through the centuries.
Mhm.
Of course, now they have the cell phones and they can contact people in different cities, instantaneously. And so it's different in that way. But it's still basically, you're thinking about, what was the motive? Who had the opportunity? You have to find out the background of the person, the victim, to figure out who had the motive, who would have wanted them killed. And so much of the basics is still the same. You have to start from somewhere. Someone has to start putting the pieces together to use the technology to figure out.
Right. Well, it's just a matter, it's just a matter of scale, that my brother calling me, I'm calling back here. It's a matter of scale to her. Sorry. I know he's got news that I should hear, but I'm not going to be able to do that. Oh, come on. I don't even know how to use my phone. Isn't that pitiful? There we go. Let's see if that'll work. It's a matter of scale that, the basics are all the same. It's just that the thing is expanded. And so the new tools allow you a much bigger reach than, York, as you point out, is very small. Damn it. I'm sorry. I don't know how to do that. Let me just tell him goodbye. Hi, I'm on a Zoom call. Can I call you back in a minute? That's okay. Bye. A personal note here. My brother and I are executors of our deceased sister and her husband's estate, and we are engaged in selling a co-op in New York City. And, if you could work out a co-op in York, you would come up with one of the best way. I mean, the pool of suspects and the likely victim of the killing would be great. It has been a nightmare. It's a form of property ownership that probably only works in a big city, and it is amazing. So anyway, I apologize. I feel like he's got good news for me, but until we're done to find out.
I hope it's good news.
So do I. I mean, this has gone on for quite a while. Being the executor of someone's estate is a very complicated thing.
Oh,
And
it is.
there's
Yeah.
property involved, and medieval law um, was very, very strict about transfers of property and so forth. It's come up in a lot of historical mystery, and the English are very good on keeping records and, paying attention to how writing stuff down, keeping track of not just the property, but the contents and figuring out where it all went. I've always been impressed by that.
And it's just a gold mine for historians because we can find out, that this person had a plethora of cushions in their house when they died and left them to this person and that person and spoons. And yeah, it's just so much fun to read the wills and the lists of property and
I know, and they were
people
people
together
that,
for that.
yeah, people owned, disparate properties. I mean, wealthy families would have properties scattered all over the country, and keeping track of all of those properties and the things that went in them and went with them is extraordinary. Big estates had muniment rooms where they kept track of, they had estate records,
Mhm.
bookkeeping. I'm sure you've really enjoyed. Did I ever tell you about right outside New York? I can't remember the name of the stately home, but it's one of the ones that belongs to the National Trust. I think it's to the north of the city. Um, and I can remember it, I think it was sort of red brick, but I can't remember for sure. But anyway,
Mhm.
I went up there to visit it and went through the house. And then I've always loved kitchens. So I was, very interested in and all the stuff in all these houses that they've kept about, like the dog spits and how everything worked. So when we were done with the main house, I asked them if they had a kitchen that I could visit. And they were very shamefaced. And they said, no, they said, alas, we haven't kept up the kitchen. And then they brightened up and they said, but we have a laundry. And in a separate building behind this estate, they had, I mean, it was a serious size thing, a laundry. And, there were like 200 different irons. There were like, little irons for roughs, and there were big irons for sheets, and there were, vats to boil things in, and there was stuff to dry. It was fabulous, but I still remember how shamefaced they were. No, no kitchen, but we have a laundry.
Oh, we have a laundry. Yeah.
I know, it was great. And these big houses were just like machines. I mean, we talk about how our houses today are, but they certainly were as well. So, but when you're writing about medieval York, the houses are small, the property,
Yeah.
and so the things that might be private in a larger place sometimes are communal.
Yes. And it's I have Lucy and Owen actually living in a rather large house
Right.
for York. But they didn't start out in it. They started out in two rooms up above the apothecary and a kitchen behind, which is now the workshop at the back of the apothecary. So I've had fun kind of rearranging their lives several times. And of course Lucy has the property for their son, Hugh, from her father. She has Fraythorpe Manor, which is in the countryside, and he will inherit that. And I've taken the story to Fraythorpe a few times. And Owen now has property that was given to him, left him through Thorsby by William of Wykeham. So he has some property next to Lucy's. And I've been trying to figure out whether I want him to be on his property and solve a mystery at some point. I've been
You could do a country house murder outside of York.
Well, I did, I sort of did the country house murder at Bishopthorpe for
That's
the Little Spies. But yeah, I've been kind of thinking about that. But my latest idea for one of the Owen Archers is to take Owen to London and have he and Chaucer do one of their, because Chaucer has figured in the stories a few times, and I haven't had him in since A Conspiracy of Wolves. So it's possibly time to bring him back.
Yep, that would be absolutely great. He's having kind of a moment again with the Canterbury Tales. I've noticed, some interesting manuscripts and other things pertaining to Chaucer. He lived into the 1390s, didn't he?
He and Alice Perrers both died around 1400. That's where we lose any record of them. So sometime right around there, yeah.
And although he was an author, he was actually an official. I'm trying to remember, was he in customs? What was
He was in customs,
Right.
In the wool customs, and he was pretty favored by Edward III because, of course, his sister-in-law is Catherine.
Right.
He's married to Catherine's sister, and so he was pretty favored by Edward III and by John of Gaunt.
Right. Well, we're talking about Catherine Swynford, who was John of Gaunt's mistress and eventually wife, and eventually the ancestor of the Tudors. And so Chaucer's wife, her name was Philippa, wasn't it?
Philippa, Pippa.
Yeah.
Yep.
Right. So that's right. I've forgotten that they had that marital. Well, that'd be sort of fun. You could do all kinds of good things with that. You could even have a road novel, traveling to London.
Yeah, I could.
Right. Patrick keeps finding other people. This is so interesting. He's mentioned Bernard Knight, somebody named Margaret Fraser. Yeah, I'd forgotten about
Margaret. Yes, yes.
I think she was War of the Roses, wasn't she? I'm pretty sure.
She was a little past my period. We were always teasing about because she had Thomas Chaucer in her.
That's right.
So we were always talking about bringing some story together. And we lost her.
We did. She was 15th century. Yeah. So, I mean, there are many more than my aging memory could instantly recall. But I mean, for a long time, we were really just wealthy with medieval mystery. And I'm hoping, as I said, that it will come around again. But meantime, we have Candace.
You have me.
We do have you. So the 16th Owen Archer, do you have a title for it?
A Lion's Ransom.
A Lion's Ransom. Ooh, okay. And it's not going to be Richard II because we're past all that. So
I'm not telling you what it's about.
Okay. I was hoping to coax something out of her, but no luck there. Is it already done? Are you expecting to come out next year?
It'll come out next year and it's due at the end of March and it's not finished.
All right, but you're working on it. That's always good news. I like to encourage fans to always know that there's something good in store. Anyway, it's a wonderful series, and the research in it and the characters in it and the city itself and all, there's just so many good things to recommend. The Owen Archer series. But I will point out that Candace has also written 3 books about Margaret Carr and 3 books in the Kate Clifford series. Are you thinking about branching off into something else besides Owen? I mean, those were kind of trilogies, so,
Yeah, those were trilogies, and there might someday be another Kate Clifford because I wasn't quite finished with her.
Okay.
And I just haven't decided. She was sort of part of the issue was that she was between these 2 men.
Right.
I can't quite figure out how to work that out.
Oh my God, it was a medieval Janet Ivanovich. Shame on you. That's too funny. Is it Joe? Is it?
Yeah.
Love it. Right. Okay. Well, anyway, Patrick, now that you've done all this research on writers of historical mystery, feel free to come back in and ask questions. And thank you for that. There's so many names I'd forgotten.
Yeah, I remember when I was first starting, I don't think it was, I think the Apothecary Rose had been out. When did that come out? 93 or 94?
93. 93.
I think it was
Well,
the
right before, because you came to the store in 95. So,
95.
yeah.
Lady Chapel, I remember being around, I think.
Mhm.
It's hard to say. Let's see, questions. People are coming up with or suggesting authors
Oh, good.
like Elizabeth Chadwick.
Yes.
Oh, right. Yes.
And some were not strictly mysteries. I
Right.
was leaving out some, Philippa Gregory has written some very good
Mhm.
medieval stuff. I'm trying to remember the lovely Scotswoman whose husband was the publisher of The Scotsman and whom I had lunch with. And I can't think of her name at the moment. But anyway, there was just so many authors that just reveled in the medieval times. Why don't we compile a list, Patrick, and then we can send it out to, along with,
Sounds like fun. Well,
yeah,
my friend Chris Nixon, who writes about Leeds, he did 4 books about Chesterfield that were medieval.
yeah.
John Carpenter. Yeah.
Send me a list. And Patrick has just come up with some. Why don't we compile a whole list
Yeah.
of
That
medieval?
sounds like fun.
Because I think quite a few of them are probably existing digitally, even if not actually in print
I
at the
would think so. Yeah.
or in used copies. So that would be nice for people who would like to enjoy them.
Did you mention Eric and Mary Reed? Were they medieval?
No, they were
I don't know
6th
them.
century AD. They were Justinian and Constantinople. So
I see.
Ah,
they
yeah.
were too early for properly medieval. They were wonderful books, though. I love them. They were so completely off the wall.
And
And
then is Kate Sedley still around?
I
Oh,
don't
yeah.
think so.
I don't think so.
No.
I don't know. Severin publishes quite a few authors like that, so I can read their list and see. They have a couple of very long running not medieval, sorry, Elizabethan. Fiona Buckley has written, I
Oh,
cannot
right. Fiona
remember
Buckley.
how
Yeah.
many Elizabethan, and that is really a saga. I mean, they go on forever. And they also had Rosemary Rowe has written a very good Britain Roman set in around I'm trying to think. I want to say Glastonbury, but that's not quite right. But anyway, a really excellent series with a mosaic maker was the original detective. So I will dredge into all that. I think it'd be fun.
Carolyn Rowe. Carolyn Rowe was she did 3 or 4 with a blind Jewish. He
Were
was the
those
main
paperback
character.
originals?
I think they were. I think they
I
were.
remember those. Something
I bet.
Ren for something. I don't know.
Yeah.
And then
All
there's the
right.
Wonderful Gesture series. I keep wanting to call it the 13th Tale, but that's not quite right. But
Jester
Oh,
Leaps In. Alan Gordon.
Alan Gordon, right, and his wonderful series was sort of based on Shakespeare, but they
mhm.
were medieval and absolutely wonderful. I wish he had written more of them. God, I think Fest the Fool, that was who he was, Fest, Feste. Fest the Fool was so amazing, right?
Was Pat McIntosh, is that medieval?
Doesn't sound familiar to me, but
No.
that
She
doesn't
was
mean I.
there were a bunch of historical novelists, but from Constable. Weren't there, Barbara? A few?
Yeah, yeah, they did
Right.
an awful lot. Before the cozies took over, there were fewer cozies, but there were a lot of medieval mystery that kind of functioned for people that,
Oh, yeah, I think so.
it was, as I said, it was kind of a thing. And now we have senior sleuths in cozies and excuse me. It's fashion in publishing. It always is fashion. One person does something great and then people rush into sort of, it's like sticker things, like sticker balls, where they
Yeah.
they all kind of do that. And then something else comes along. But we'll see. We can go back and try to dredge some up.
Yeah. Well, there's a question that's come in. It's a pretty obvious one, which is why was Candace interested in medieval times?
It's that answer changes over time as I remember different things. But I was always fascinated with history. And Catherine was actually one of the books that made me think, oh, this would be kind of fun to write. But when I was in grad school, or actually when I was an undergraduate, I changed universities and I changed my major, and I needed to take a couple of English classes, and the few that were open, one of them was Chaucer. And I really didn't want to take a Chaucer class, but I'm very interested in languages. So I thought, okay, I'll take this. And instead of starting with the Canterbury Tales, the first quarter was Troilus and Cressida, which is a marvelous long poem that is truly, I think, one of the first novels. It's just so brilliant. I mean, it's got the lovers, it's got the betrayal, it's got the politics, and it's just brilliant. And I had a wonderful teacher, Elizabeth Armstrong, who read Middle English in sort of a Scandinavian lilt, which is now kind of accepted as probably is very much how it sounded. And I just loved her reading the stories, and I could hear, my ear would pick up, how that was I knew what it was saying, and it was so close to our modern English in so many ways and fascinating ways. And I fell in love with it. And then I studied Old English and just loved the older languages. So out of a class that I didn't want to take, it became my passion. And when I went to grad school, that's what I was studying. I was steeped in the Middle Ages.
Why did you decide to write mysteries?
Well, I wanted to write about York because I'd gone to York and I loved it. And I thought, well, this might be an excuse to keep going back. And it's just such a fascinating city. And I wrote a story. It was sort of a very early version of The Apothecary Rose. And I sent it out to some agents, and they said, this is just a period piece, and that's just not marketable. You need to turn it into either a romance or a mystery. And I have tried writing romances, and they all turn into comedies. So I thought nowadays comic romances are really in, but at the time they weren't. And so I thought, okay, I'm going to write a mystery. I'm going to figure out how to turn this into a mystery. And I discovered that I have a mind for plotting. I really enjoy plotting. And so it was just a natural for me. When I went away from mysteries for 2 books and did the novel about Alice Perrers and the novel about Joan of Kent as Emma Campion, I really missed the mysteries. I missed that power to tell a different story, because these were, women who actually existed, and I was sort of doing a fictional biography of them. I really missed having this power to decide who to kill and who's going to win in the end, and ran back.
You couldn't really do that with either of them. I've always thought Alice Paris was a really fascinating character, but
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I really enjoyed. I'm not sorry at all that I spent the time working on her, and I got Troilus and Cressida in the book because Chaucer's basing it on Alice, and so that I used bits of it in the beginning of different chapters, and so I had my fun with that. But yeah, I was so happy to get back to the middle class and the everyday people, because I was really sick of being a court in those books.
boy, what a snake pit the courts were too. Wow.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure if we've talked about it, but someone brought up Sharon K. Penman's 4 mystery series.
Right.
Right. That's right. She did one too.
Well, she was writing Eleanor of Aquitaine. She won the Edgar for the first one that she wrote in that series, but she went down the Richard Lionheart rabbit hole
Mhm.
towards the end of her life. And she really got caught up in Richard and away from mystery and more into sort of biography, very big. She was a wonderful person, wonderful writer too, I think. I really enjoyed her mysteries. I can't recall what she called them. And it wasn't, Eleanor wasn't the sleuth. She was the sleuth, but she had some guy, you know,
If she had somebody working for
she
her.
did,
Yeah.
exactly. Some guy at court that worked for her. But they were really, The Queen's Man was the name of the first
Yeah.
one. And
Yeah.
it did win the Edgar, which is kind of unusual, you know, for an historical. I remember when the 18th century one by, here I'm going to go blank again, but it was based on the story of the South Sea Bubble. Um, he went on to write some other books, but he was, anyway, I thought it was an interesting book, and the last book in the world I thought was going to win the Edgar for best novel. And
Yeah, it's
you
sometimes
know,
really
it's every
surprising.
once in a while that you know they can surprise you. I think today it would be harder for an historical right now to probably snag one of the top
Oh,
prizes.
yeah, I think
But
so.
it'll come back around. You know, it always does.
And I may still be around.
Absolutely. It's called A Conspiracy of Paper by David.
Liz.
This.
Thank you, David Liss.
Yeah.
And I thought it was a wonderful book. And basically, you know, it was kind
Was
of
it?
the European introduction to modern banking. You know, I mean, you can go all the way back to the Mongols, who were the first people to kind of really introduce modern banking. But yeah, Conspiracy Paper was an amazing book. And then he followed it up one with the book about not the tulip frenzy in Holland, but the coffee frenzy that preceded the tulip frenzy. Holland was like boom or bust on comestibles and commodities in the 18th, 17th, and 18th century. I mean, they really got into something, and then they would all go bankrupt, you know, when it got overblown. The tulip conspiracy was the one that, I mean, the tulip mania was a big one. But I remember, do you remember Patrick? He came to the store and
Yeah,
he
was
made
that the
coffee. Oh
coffee
my
trade?
God. I mean, telling you, Candace, he came to the store and he made us coffee the way the Dutch, sorry, the way the Dutch would have made it then. It was
Huh.
absolutely disgusting. I mean, yeah, it had red wine in it. It was made with cold water. The coffee beans were ground up. Oh, it was horrible. And I kept wondering, you know, why is it that anybody cared enough about it to turn this into, you know, one of those like future things in soybean trading or something is what
Huh.
it came down to.
Huh.
Sorry, that was a rabbit hole. Carry on.
Is Peter Tremaine, was he writing about medieval Ireland?
He was Ireland. Yeah.
But really earlier, I think Sister Fidelma,
Very early.
much earlier than what we think
Yeah.
of as medieval. And he just wrote his 32nd or 33rd. It's available right now from Severn. And
Oh, I
we,
didn't
if
know
you
that.
look, we have a couple of orders for it.
And I'm thinking of, oh, what was his name? Edward something who did um
Oh,
Marston.
well,
Marston.
that was Edward Marston. That was Elizabethan, wasn't it?
Yes, it was
Yeah,
Elizabeth,
he was
the
Elizabethan.
Queen's Men. It was a bunch
Yeah.
of players in the time of,
But
Yeah.
he also did the Domesday series.
yes, he did.
That's
And
right.
yep,
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
was actually a really interesting series, I
Yeah.
thought. And he went to various parts of England, all connected with the, you know, the Domesday census.
Yeah. I got my brother-in-law really hooked on those.
Yeah, they
He
were great.
didn't like historical fiction, didn't like historical mysteries, but he loved those books for some reason. He couldn't explain it.
Man, the list of medieval mysteries keeps growing. I mean, I just sit here, it's just,
Remember the medieval, what is it, the medieval murderers, that group of writers?
yeah,
Were you part of that group, Candace?
No, no, I wasn't.
I think they were all Brits.
they were all
They
British.
were.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, I don't know if I have any more real questions. Just
People
somebody
are coming
says,
up with a lot of names.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah, we started something.
Justin De Quincy was Sharon's sleuth, Sharon
That's right.
companion.
Absolutely. Isn't it wonderful to have all this help? I love that. You know, I have this like dim memory, and then the next thing I know, we
Yeah,
have everybody
yeah, that's
contributing to
really
it.
fun.
Now, I'm really
Yeah,
serious. I'm going to compile a bibliography of medieval mystery that I can remember. We'll send it around.
yeah.
That sounds like fun.
I guess the last one would be a question from Jell in Australia, I think. And do you plot on paper or do you use a computer?
I do everything on the computer. I do have whiteboards around my office, and I have various notes and things that are going on with that. And I have pieces of paper all over my desk like this with like, little bits and pieces that I think of during the day. And I have Post-its, and my desk is just a mess of stuff that and I'll write something out and then I'll write on it. And so I have all that paper, but all of my writing is actually done on the computer.
Do you print it out and edit it by hand though afterward?
I
You do?
used to. I used to all the time, and then I got very concerned about the trees. And I decided to, and the editors now send everything, it's electronically tracked.
Mhm.
And so we do it online, and it took me a while to get used to that because I was an editor before I was published. And everything was done in, we printed out everything, and it was research publications, it was scientific publications, but we printed everything out because sometimes it just looked different to you on the paper than it did on the screen. But I've come to have pretty much faith in the fact that I'm seeing the same thing on the screen. It just kind of took a while because that was in, the 90s, the 80s, the late 80s. And it it's really, we've learned to trust what we see on the screen. And I think it took a while. I still don't like to read books and ebooks, though. I like a nice physical book in my hand.
I'm sure after you spent all day staring at your screen, the last thing
Mhm.
you want to do is the same thing.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
If I'm blurbing somebody, they'll always send an ebook and I'll read it on my tablet, but I would really rather not. And I don't remember what I've read
That's the real
in
problem.
the ebook nearly as much. When I'm reading a book, I know, it was on the left-hand side of the page. It was about halfway down. It was about a quarter through the book. I just have a memory like that for the physical book, and I just don't for an ebook. It just isn't the
Well, an
same.
ebook is basically just a scroll. It's
Yeah,
like a fax scroll. I have the same thing. I drive publishers crazy because I can't remember anything that I read electronically.
yeah.
So I'm always asking them for a physical copy. I'm happy to have a bound manuscript. I mean, it doesn't have to be a book. It just has to
Doesn't
be printed.
this shows my ignorance, but does an ebook, like when you're reading it on a device, do the pages go horizontally or do they go
You
vertically?
can on some of them you can choose. You can set up how you want it to go. So it that helps a little bit.
Yeah,
Because vertically it would really mess with your brain, I think, or at least with
yeah.
mine.
Yeah,
Yeah.
no, mine too. You can swipe it that way, but it doesn't really. I think what ebooks are really beneficial for are people with vision problems because you can dial up the size
Right.
and the light and so forth. And, people are not then forced to read Braille when their eyesight is compromised. They can still read type, but they can take it up to like, 16 or 20 point Times Roman or something and, get by with it.
And audiobooks are great. And I have some news
Oh,
that
good.
that Tantor Audio, had done books 1 through 3 with the wonderful narrator Derek Perkins. And now I've signed a contract for books 4 through 8. So they're moving through the Owen Archers, and more of them are going to be on audio. And Derek Perkins will continue to be the narrator. And I like him because he has a Welsh background. So he has, an understanding of how Owen would sound, and yeah, so very happy about that.
That's wonderful news, Candace. Well, congratulations. I think it's great. You've worked so hard, and done such a wonderful job with these books. And it's great that you are getting support with paperbacks so that all the books are available and
Yeah.
audiobooks. And it's not an easy thing anymore, to have a whole series still in print.
No, I'm quite amazed because when you think about the first book came out in 93,
Mhm.
and it's been 30 years, and it was quite remarkable when Severn House wanted to bring it.
I think so too. I think it was a real testament to you. So here we have book 15, A Snake in the Barley. And Patrick has earlier pointed out that The Apothecary Rose, the book that started this whole thing, is available along with 13 other paperbacks. So if you're in a mood for medieval mystery, you can binge your way through the whole thing. So thank you, Candace.
Rapid fire.
Okay, there they all are. Love it.
Oh, that's
Let's
great.
go.
And they put the arrow in all
Yes,
of them, haven't they? Yeah,
yes.
that's pretty nice. We're talking about the
Yeah,
stylized arrows in the
yep,
Owen Candace's name. Very nice.
yeah. They did a gorgeous job. It
Yeah,
was a big project. They
yeah.
worked on it for a year, and I really
I think
appreciate it.
I think their productions are very well done. They're very
I do too.
pretty. Yeah, there she is, the river, and then the Fox in the Fold. Is that the last one? No, they're just at random order there, right?
And yeah,
He's going
I know.
backwards.
Sorry, right.
that's a handsome one.
Yeah,
Yeah,
It's
you know,
very
I mean,
classy looking.
yeah,
they
they really
A
are
good one.
beautiful. I like
Digital
that one. I
sword.
like that. It's moody, isn't it?
Yeah, with the
Yeah.
hood.
Yeah, that's a really
are
good one.
very good.
You know, they decided they were going to do this hooded character in all the books. So they really had to come up with, a
Right.
variation on them.
But good for them to have such a dedicated art department and not just doing it piecemeal. I think Severn does a very quality job. Their primary customer in the United States has been libraries, but they're branching out and good for them. I met with the publisher last June in London. We had a really good conversation about what they're doing and, you know, so I'm very pleased that they are moving along
Me too.
into you know, a wider range of authors and a wider range of books. It's great. So thank you all very much for watching us tonight. Candace, have a very happy holiday. Happy holidays to all of you. This is an interesting year because Christmas and Hanukkah and Kwanzaa all fall on the same day this year.
Do they really? I hadn't
They
even noticed.
do. Yeah, December 25th. I think that's remarkable.
That's
So
great.
yep. So we have a short run to Christmas, but then all the holidays come together. So if you're thinking about an interesting Christmas gift, you could consider for somebody the Apothecary Rose and a gift certificate for more of the books.
Or the whole Candace Robb catalog where
Oh,
you
I
have
think so.
voted.
You could. Absolutely true. Anyway, good night, Candace. Lovely to see you. Good night.